We're taking a slightly different approach to the episode today. This is the recording of a live stream, which was really intended to be just a video. But I'm going to release it because it's a pretty important subject. And some of we discuss images and we discuss a video. They are all available for you to check out on thebirdemergency.com/adrift. But we not only talk about a really interesting long-term study of a seabird colony, we meet amazing scientists, all with different projects, but all focused around plastic and plastic pollution. We confront the issue of eco-grief. Have you ever wondered how the scientists who are pulling on the boots every day, putting on the protective clothing, getting the headlamps on, getting out doing field work at night, cope with the incessant stream of bad news? And I thought this was important in the wake of the release of the State of the Environment report that happened yesterday in Australia. I go off on a few rants in this video or in this episode, but I'm really passionate about this subject, and I am so frustrated with how far we have not come in 20 odd years. With that, please enjoy meeting the amazing team from the Adrift Lab talking about their work with the Flesh-footed Shearwaters on Lord Howe Island. Hi, bird nerds. It should be Saturday. It should be Seabird Saturday, but it's not. It's Tuesday, and it's the biggest Tuesday in Australia for a long time because the State of the Environment report has been released. So maybe something is going to happen about the disastrous state of our natural environment. And to celebrate or commiserate and to explore more about seabirds, I'm joined by the Adrift Lab crew. Hello, Adrift Lab crew. How are you all? Now, the Adrift Lab is led by Dr. Jenn Lavers. Jenn, how are you?
Yes, very good, thanks.
Great. Jenn, tell us about the Adrift Lab. It's part of the University of Tasmania, but tell us what it's all about and tell us about you.
Sure. So I'm a senior lecturer in marine science. It's a long title for essentially saying I'm a marine biologist. Specifically, I focus on the area of marine pollution, so plastics, but also chemicals. And we, as a lab, use a range of marine species to be our sentinels or bioindicators, essentially our eyes and our ears to tell us what's out there in the big blue that would probably cost way too much money and take way too much time if we had to charter vessels and do crazy things like that. So the wildlife that's out there in the ocean can tell us a lot about what we need to know. And the Adrift Lab came about a little bit organically and naturally in response to these really pressing environmental issues of plastics and chemical pollution. But I think saying that doesn't really give credit to the fact that creating a lab like this takes a lot of time and energy and probably around a decade in total. And we started off really small and I suppose humble with just one or two students. And the reason why I chose to create the lab is because I myself, as one or two people, myself and some colleagues, like brilliant folks like Steph Burrell in New Zealand, on our own, we can't really tackle all of these different pressing issues that the environment faces, particularly at the pace of change that everything is currently happening. And so we have the opportunity to bring on others to help us meet that demand. And along the way, we get to mentor and bring up the next generation of young, inspiring, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed scientists that make me feel inspired and energized on days when really I just feel totally exhausted. Here's some of our wonderful crew that we get to introduce you today.
Before we go through the intros, let's acknowledge who the other sort of team leaders are in Team Adrift, because they're obviously not here, but you did have some luminaries who were with you on Lord Howe Island. So who else is on the leadership panel, the team, and who do you collaborate with? Because that was something I noticed, that you do some international collaborations as well. And then we'll kick into the superstars.
Sure. So, Adrift Lab wouldn't be anything of what it is without the amazing team that we've been fortunate to build. And so we do have some other co-leads. So Dr. Alexander Bond, who's the principal curator in charge of birds at the Natural History Museum in London. So he gets to do really wonderfully awkwardly timed Zoom calls with us and our team throughout the year. And he also gets to come to Lord Howe Island and participate in the field data collection. So we do actually get to see him in person. And he's just been an absolute legend and superstar. Alix and I have been working together for the better part of 15 years. We also work with Dr. Jack Rivers-Ottey, who's based at the Menzies Institute, which is our human or medical science institute here in Tasmania. And Jack's actually trained as a human medical scientist with expertise in inflammation, or the body's inflammatory response to things like inhaled particles, asbestos and dust and things like that. And we were really lucky to draw on his wealth of knowledge and expertise, things that I would never have fathomed to ask those questions or think about it in a particular way, and draw him into the lab. And he just provides that level of insight and statistical knowledge as well that has just taken things to the next level. So we're really lucky. Above and beyond that, we have just been able to collaborate with some stellar human beings over the last 10 years that we are so fortunate and lucky to have worked with. For example, the incredible Justin Gilligan, who's a renowned photographer who lives and works on Lord Howe Island. Just in the last couple of months, he photographed our team doing research on the island, and those photographs were part of a feature article in Australian Geographic. So this month, the July 2022 issue. So if you go to your local newsagent, you'll see we're in this month's issue. We've also worked with the likes of Mandy Barker, who's also an internationally renowned and award-winning photographer, and countless documentary crews. We've got a new documentary coming out in February 2023 with Envoy Films that will feature many of the faces that you see here in front of you. So we're just constantly collaborating and diversifying to raise the profile of what's into our marine environment, our birds, and the amount of that's in the ocean.
Now, Jen, just before you introduce the superstar cast on the couch, and for those watching, let me acknowledge that's Steph Burrell's image that she gave me when I did the very first episode of The Bird Emergency all those years ago. But I'm wearing a beanie because it's really cold, and you guys are sitting under a blanket because it's really cold. Visually, we're looking a little bit different. I just want to ask, Alix Bond, he's a superstar science communicator, isn't he?
Yeah, I would say we each kind of carry our own weight in that regard. It's something that we're really proud of at Adrift Lab is embracing science communication. We don't do science to keep the data and the amazing findings to ourselves, but we also recognize that the way that we write about science tends to be in a really jargon way, and that it's up to us to translate that into myriad languages, whether that's photography or videography or even just your voice, but communicating it in a way that translates just how exciting and innovative and important our findings are. And so each and every one of us make a really concerted effort and make the time to do all of those things and have a lot of fun in the process.
You're speaking my language. Now, Alix runs Best of Crest, doesn't he?
I believe, yes.
Yeah. And like Bird Wordle, I think, as well, or he's got another puzzle that he does. And I think he's got like a Dungeons and Dragons thing going on as well. He's amazing. But anyway, enough about Alix. Jennifer, who's next to you?
Yep, to my left or your right, I have the incredible Lillian Stewart. Lillian did her honors with me a couple of years ago, and she's going to talk a little bit about that to introduce herself. And then liked the experience enough to stick around for another 4 years and do her PhD. So Lillian's about 2 years into her PhD project. All of it focused, well, that'll be a uniting theme, actually. All of us work on some aspect of waste and plastics and pollution in the environment. We also have the incredible Alix who is a little bit more of a more recent recruit to the lab. Alix started her PhD in February, and she's working at the Menzies Health Institute with Dr. Jack Oddie, looking at some of the more in-depth ways that plastic can cause harm. And on the far end, we have Nina Jones. Nina's our honors student and also a relatively new recruit to the lab. Nina's looking at something that's a little bit left of field, looking at contamination issues in labs. So we as scientists, as researchers, have really good intentions of generating good, robust data, but actually how and what we do in the lab can affect what that data looks like. And so that's where Nina's really important work comes in.
Well, let's start with you, Nina, because I haven't got lots of pictures of yours to run through, but I do have some good pics that have got the lab. So tell us about what your thesis is all about, your project, and a little bit about your background. You call yourself a bird nerd.
I am a bird nerd. I come from an ecology background. I studied an undergrad of animal ecology and I graduated over a year ago now. So I had a bit of a break before I came on to do my honours. So it's very different to what I'm looking at now in my honours. There's not really any animal element. I'm purely just looking at plastics. And I'm focusing on plastic contamination within laboratories and where those sources are coming from. And by focusing on this project, we're hoping that it's going to be able to enhance the way that we conduct our experiments within the laboratory, in a way that we're limiting our environmental samples from becoming contaminated by the plastics that we are introducing into the lab. So we use a lot of plastic instruments like pipettes, petri dishes, all sorts of things that could theoretically be contaminating our samples. But we don't exactly know if that is happening yet. There is just a lot of speculation within the literature that it is happening. So I'm trying to find out if it is actually happening and where is that happening.
So that's an extension of the thread that we hear about a lot, that in every kind of analysis that people are doing of tissue and environment, anywhere microplastics are cropping up.
Yes.
But perhaps some of those results are indicative of the contamination issues that come from the surfaces and the equipment that we're using to conduct the analysis that we're making decisions on. Have I got that? Okay, good. Yeah. That sounds like it's well and truly.
Yeah, because we know that water can sometimes be contaminated with plastics, and we use a lot of that within the laboratory. And because we're already looking at these particles that are so tiny and microscopic, we could be introducing this into the experiments, which could be altering the results that we see. And so we don't really know how much of that are we seeing in our results. Is it actually coming from the environmental sample, or are we introducing it throughout the experimental process?
Nina, do you know if there's many other people around the world taking the same kind of approach that you are, or are you a bit of a thought leader?
Oh, that's a bold statement. And I want to say yes, because that it feels good to be able to contribute in a way that maybe we haven't so much done so before in the past. But there are many researchers that are identifying that contamination may be an issue, but as far as I'm aware, no one has really gone into so much depth as to actually identify where these sources are coming from and truly say, yes, this thing that we're doing is causing contamination. Let's get that word out there so that other researchers within the field or other fields can adapt their methodologies so that they can limit the amount of contamination.
Waiting for your TED Talk, no doubt about it.
That's a great idea.
Thank you.
Lillian, you're next.
Let's go for it. I'm Lill. I have I would say semi-recently started my PhD. I'm coming up to about halfway through. But before that, I did my honours with Jenn and her wonderful lab. And I was asked if I wanted to study something that I hadn't really thought about a whole lot of before. And that was if I wanted to look at vomit from a seabird and look at what's in that vomit. I believe, there we go, it's up on the screen right now. So what I looked at was essentially trying to find what are the items that our, like Jenn said, sentinel species eating that they shouldn't? And can this tell us what's happening in the environment around us and perhaps how our consumerism and the waste that we produce and that sort of thing, how that is impacting the world around us? And so those little ball things that were on the screen, they're about the size of a 50-cent piece. Those are the regurgitated pellets from a seagull, basically the birds that would be living in pretty much every city around Australia. These ones are from a Pacific gull, so they're the largest species. And you can see right there that there are things that stand out that absolutely should not be there. So you've got things like that bright red sort of sharp-looking piece. We believe that's like the brake cover of like a tail light on a car or like a reflector on the road. We've got some string from like a Christmas ham kind of thing. We've also got things like baling twine, plastic bags, razor blades. There's a Christmas decoration in there as well. And the main finding that came from that was that these birds are essentially scavenging. And we know that seagulls do that. They're really good at it. They're quite good at adapting around the way that we've lived. They've been quite successful. But clearly what we're seeing is that our behaviour is starting to permeate into their lives. And so they're either mistaking items for food, whether they look or they smell like items that they would typically eat. And we found that over 90% of those little vomit pellets that we surveyed had items that shouldn't be there, whether that be plastic, glass, or metal, or a combination of all three. And basically, we do know that when animals eat items they shouldn't, it causes a lot of problems. And whilst that project didn't have the time to go into the specific impacts, we do know that it's not great and we can do a lot better with the way that we go about producing waste and consuming different items. And also another carry-on finding from that study was that we collected those pellets that the birds had deposited for us from a wetland environment. And we know that wetlands and rivers will eventually end up in the ocean. And so when these birds come home at night to roost and produce the pellets of the things that they can't digest, that's a natural process. They do that round about every day. They are vomiting them up essentially into a river. And with those rivers transporting nutrients and items further out downstream and out to sea, these birds are spreading our waste even further than from when it was put in a bin or littered on the ground or in a landfill. And so that was a really eye-opening study. I really enjoyed it. It had a bit of like a hands-on, slightly gross element to it, which I really enjoyed. But I really love being part of the lab and finding out things like that that weren't immediately obvious, but were really awesome findings. And so I'm doing a PhD now where I'm looking more so at the plastic side of things rather than the animal side, but still just as important, looking at what's in our environment, what's washing up on beaches in specifically remote areas. There's not a whole lot of data there. How much is washing up? And if we are to collect like beach plastic, ocean plastic, is it actually a good idea to collect and do things with it? What could we do? What shouldn't we do? Basically, what's happening on a very large scale.
Can I just extend that thought a little bit, Lill? And let's note that so many of these amazing pictures that we're able to run through today have been taken by Lill. They tell the story of how much crap is out there. We've heard about the Pacific plastic garbage patch and things like that, but it's ubiquitous now. It's everywhere. It's on every beach. It's in, as you said, every marsh, every wetland, every creek, every beach is covered in these tiny or small bits of plastic. So we've got a conundrum, have we, Lill, about whether we should be removing. It just seems like it's an obvious thing. We should be collecting it and removing it from the environment and then recovering the resource, the energy and the value that is within all of that plastic. But is there another train of thought, is there?
So it's a bit of a loaded question, and it's one of those ones that there isn't going to be one answer fits every situation. We know that just generally managing waste requires individual strategies depending on where you are, what you're dealing with, how much you're dealing with, that sort of thing. There's so many factors that contribute to how we manage those resources and materials. And waste is increasingly being seen as a resource. It's got economic value. So that's immediately attractive to, say, government, industry, and certain other groups. And so plastic waste, as it is increasing in our environment, it's starting to beg the question, if we are to collect it, like people do in beach cleanups, is there value to be gained from this? Could we do something? Is it better to collect it, do something with it, than to just put it somewhere else, like in a landfill oftentimes, and specifically in remote regions when we clean up plastic from beaches, the only options are to either landfill it or perhaps incinerate it, just as a means to get rid of it, sort of thing. And so before we jump the gun and start to perhaps do things that might have consequences that we haven't considered, or might have consequences that are just making another problem somewhere else, we need to look at, for example, what are the types of plastics that are washing up around Australia? So we know that there's about seven types printed, like on the little number on the bottom of the bottle that you buy from the shop. And it's really easy to see if you pick up a drink bottle, a single-use drink bottle, it's got a number on it. So we know what type of plastic that is. But if that's been floating out at sea for months, years, decades, we don't really know what that is anymore. It's often degraded. It's broken down into smaller pieces, might have things growing on it. And so just by looking at that, we don't know exactly what we're dealing with. It's plastic, but that is a whole umbrella term for like heaps of different types of materials. And so depending on that type is going to depend on the options available for dealing with that. And so part of the project that I'm working on at the moment is to survey the plastics washing up around Australia, particularly in remote regions where the plastics that are there on the beach are extremely likely to have originated from at sea rather than litter being dropped on a beach by a tourist perhaps. And so that's exactly what I'm working on now. And I really hope, I don't have any data just yet because I literally am in the lab this week, but we're really hoping to present at least a starting point to say, all right, what are we working with? What, say, percentage of, if you do a beach cleanup, what percentage of that is actually going to be possibly usable for something, or should we change our mindset completely depending on this material that we're working with?
That's a really interesting point, isn't it? That I guess the general public doesn't think beyond plastic. I think we all know that there are different types of plastic, but the degradation and temperature and exposure to all sorts of compounds change the nature of the plastic. So there may not be any economic way for industrial processes to recover the energy value and the resource value of that waste. So that's going to be really important as we do remove this crap from the environment, which I think is going to increasingly happen. So be really interested to follow your work along there, Lill. I think that will be really valuable work.
Oh, absolutely. I'm really keen to see what this finds. And it's going to answer a lot of questions, but ask a lot more. And so what we're wanting to say from this is, depending on where you are in an Australian context, perhaps you're dealing with an area that gets a lot of, I'm going to say just like better quality, more usable sort of materials. Perhaps other areas aren't. And so we're wanting to identify that perhaps we need to really start tailoring our solutions to what's happening in different areas. And the logical thing to do would be to stop making so much plastic, stop putting so much of it into the environment. But realistically, we can't probably do that as quick as we would like to. So we need to start looking at what is happening right here, right now, and what are our options there.
That's right. We've been ignoring this problem for 50 years. I think we can't kick it down the road any longer. So your TED Talk will be coming up too in a couple of years. So Alix, superstar, you've got to follow on.
Yeah, no, for now.
So what's your TED Talk going to be on, Alix?
Well, I'll start with my background. I did a master's in marine and Antarctic science, and I studied the diet of Antarctic seabirds, and I was using DNA analysis of their scat samples, so their poo. And it's like eDNA. You can see what's being flushed through their system, and we pick up different DNA from different species, and so that was really interesting. But one thing we couldn't pick up was plastics and pollution, because that doesn't shed DNA while it's being processed. And so when I left my master's, I felt like I was really tackling their diet but not quite capturing the full thing, and that kind of led me to Jenn's work, where I was really interested in pollution and how pollution is affecting these species, because in some instances I could see it within the poo, but not being able to identify that was really frustrating. And so with Jenn, my PhD is trying to look at how plastics, and in particular microplastics, so the really small stuff, is affecting the health of the birds. And we're also going to be inferring how it could be affecting human health as well. So on Lord Howe, we collected a bunch of samples of their organs, and I'm going to be doing molecular analysis on them to work out how their organs might be affected from plastic load. Jenn's research has found that they have reduced body size, the plastic impacted birds, and their blood chemistry has also been altered. So I'm going to try and understand what's happening on a molecular level and within their organs that is causing these big differences in their bodies.
We've got some really good images to talk about with bits of plastic and the lab and whatnot, and we'll get to them shortly. But let's talk why you were at Lord Howe, and who do you want to cover that one, Jenn? And I'll run through some of these images, and you can tell us what we're looking at and why Lord Howe was a good location to do the work.
Sure. So it's a bit of a funny journey that first brought me to Lord Howe Island. So as a PhD student, I was fortunate to go and live and work on a remote uninhabited island in Hawaii, not the famous Midway Island, but one of its sister islands. And it's this remote, far-flung, otherwise pristine destination. And this is in the very early 2000s. So we're talking 20 years ago, at a time where we weren't talking about plastics. Nobody really knew how big and bad this issue was going to get. It just wasn't the flavor of the time. And here I was on this far-flung remote island, and the seabirds all around me on this remote island were dying. And when their bodies would degrade and break open, there was cigarette lighters and bottle caps and toothbrushes. And I had a bit of a light bulb moment where I was thinking about where those Hawaiian seabirds were foraging, which was actually in the Bering Sea off the coast of Alaska. That's known to be a seabird hotspot. It's very biodiverse, very productive waters. And those Hawaiian seabirds are not the only seabirds to be foraging in that area. So I was thinking about it and realizing that, well, if that's where the Hawaiian seabirds are getting their plastic, then probably a lot of other seabird species that also occupy that same very productive waters are probably also being exposed to plastic. So when I came to Australia about a year later, I had the opportunity to go to Lord Howe Island, and within a matter of hours of arriving on the island, I was walking through the colony, the shearwater colony, and things started to look really familiar. In Hawaii, on the remote island, I'd walk through the colony and there would be those bottle caps and cigarette lighters and all kinds of things strewn about that the birds had brought back to the island and deposited. And here I was, probably close to 8,000 kilometers away on a completely different part of the planet, and there were bottle caps and plastic fragments and things strewn about through a different species breeding colony. And it reinforced to me that plastic was really widely distributed, affecting way more than one or two seabird species, and therefore was this, And so we started collecting plastics on Lord Howe Island, plastics data right away. And so what that basically means now is we have probably what is the longest running time series or data set for plastics ingestion, not just for Australia, but in the Southern Hemisphere. So that data set goes back to 2000. And with the exception of 1 year lost due to COVID, we have data for every single year looking at rates of ingestion across two seabird species, the type of plastic, the color of the plastic, the mass and the number of pieces, and all kinds of really interesting metrics. And that's really important because really only one other data set exists worldwide that's comparable, and it's way in the Northern Hemisphere. So it's nice to have one up north and one in the south. And it allows us, for example, if the Australian government introduced some broad sweeping policy that really significantly reduced the amount of plastic inputs into our environment, or another country did, we would be able to use a long-term data set like this to determine whether or not we detect any positive changes in our surrounding environment by using those birds as an indicator to tell us how much is out there in the ocean, where it's coming from, and whether there's been any beneficial change. So kind of the Lord Howe question of why do we keep going back, and why there is this long-term data set now that we've invested in really can help us detect changes and patterns and trends over time in the way that other data sets really.
With having such a long time of really useful and consistent data available to you, are you able to say whether things improving, getting worse, or remaining about the same over that time period?
That's the pivotal question, isn't it? That's why we're doing what we're doing. And it's a really complicated and interesting answer. And if you had asked me that question even 4 months ago, I probably would have given you quite a different answer, and I'll explain. So for about a 10-year period, the amount of plastic in the birds on Lord Howe Island was fairly consistently going up. And 2012 was one of the worst years we'd ever recorded. It left us a bit speechless. And then some interesting things happened in the marine environment in 2013, 14, 15. As you would expect in a marine environment, it's a highly dynamic system. It can change from one year to the next. And so we saw the number of birds affected by plastic decline slightly in the next couple of years and seemed to be staying at those lower levels. And so we started to maybe be a little bit optimistic that things had improved. And then 2016, 2017 kicked into gear and we started to see things go back up again. And we thought, it must have just been that little bit of that dynamic marine system. Something happened. And now we're going back to what is normal for this species, which is to consume very large quantities of plastic. And the reason why I said if you had asked me 4 months ago, I might have answered things a little bit differently is because in April, May, only a few months ago, we had our worst season on record. We had very large numbers of dead and dying birds, and within those birds were very significant quantities of plastic, the most we've ever recorded, no matter how you cut that data, by number of pieces of plastic, by mass of pieces of plastic, and by proportion of the population. 2022 was our worst year. So what's the take-home message from that? Basically that everything we're currently doing worldwide right now with plastic bag bans, straw bans, cutlery bans, all those kinds of, those are absolutely the right thing to be doing. We need more of them, but that's exactly it. We need more of them. We need broader, more sweeping change to make a more significant reduction in the world's plastic pollution problem before I think we're going to detect that flow-on effect for our marine wildlife.
It's really disheartening, isn't it, to walk around your own neighbourhood, and no matter where you are in the world, I reckon you can do this. You can walk along any roadside drain, any footpath that's got a stormwater drain nearby, and you will see not only bottle tops and things like that, but also cigarette butts and whatnot. And all of this finds its way into a waterway, into the ocean, into a bay, into a stream, into an estuary. But it all ends up in the ocean. And it's not, the point I want people to understand is that it's not like we say, oh yeah, it's a problem of seabirds generally. Just individual birds who are stuffed full, absolutely stuffed full of plastics. And I find it difficult that we have a community where people will give hundreds or thousands of dollars to wildlife shelters and everything. And don't get me wrong, don't take it the wrong way. I'm not saying don't do that. The dogs in Bali, the street dogs in India and all that. But think of what the life is like for these individual birds. Let's have a look at one. That's a bird that isn't dead, but can hardly walk. It's going to die an agonising death if it's not ripped apart by some predator because it can't get away. And if it can't regurgitate those items, and it probably can't because of the way it's walking there on the beach. I don't know why people are immune or inured to the individual suffering of these creatures. What do you think, Jenn?
I think Alix can maybe answer part of this, but I completely agree with you. And I think this is where our opportunity to connect with these animals in a really intimate way and our science communication skills can play a really large role as we can do a couple of things. We can talk about the beauty and the suffering and tragedy in really intimate, heartfelt, detailed ways that help people feel that sense of connection, that don't just view this wonderful creature that's up on the screen in front of you as this all dark, kind of medium-sized bird thing that never really comes close to shore. So it's out of sight, out of mind. You might go the better part of your whole life without really interacting with one. You might see one way off on the horizon, but it won't ever be something that's close to your heart. But I can tell you that this individual was the first time we'd had that exact bird right there. The reason why I'm holding it and the reason why I've got my fingers probing into its stomach was because that's the first time we'd had a chick that was so fat, it basically broke our consola or our spring scale, and we couldn't get an accurate measurement of him. He was so chubby and fat. We all had to touch him. Even though we just wanted to let him go from an animal ethics perspective, we all just had to revel in the moment of the fantasticness that there was this gorgeous creature that was so morbidly obese. He was blissfully unaware, and that in that moment, those birds, the parents of that bird, had done what they were supposed to do, which is to stuff him full of fish and squid, so that when I found him, I went, holy smokes, and couldn't even get a weight. And the reason why that was so incredible is because I haven't seen one like that in years. And so it was so special. I had to rally my team and say, this is what it used to be like when I started coming here 17 years ago. And it's not like this anymore. And I need those opportunities to show those photos and to tell those stories and tell you that these birds live for 40 years. They mate for life. They are incredibly loyal to their breeding site, to their partner. They can dive more than 30 meters. They can travel 20,000 kilometers in a year. There's all these superfluous words that you run out of when you start talking about them. But if people don't know and you're not given a platform to demonstrate that little gray dot on the horizon that you might go your whole life and never really get to see, it matters. It's spectacular. In a lifetime, that bird will practically fly to the moon and back. It's just remarkable. And then the other part, I think that drives home the next part of the answer to your question, which is the suffering and the tragedy bit, which I think I'll hand over to Alix. We both feel it. I think we all feel it, but Alix and I have been talking about it a lot lately.
Alix, before you jump into that, I want to ask a follow-up for you, Jenn, on the point you made about the healthy chick. But Alix, when we come to you, I'll run through a lot of these images which are more disturbing, and perhaps you can talk us through the methodology of what you do in the lab. And yeah, they are disturbing. But Jenn, the question that came to me with 17 years of returning to the same colony, probably those parent pairs, recognising you over that time. So you've got a relationship with that group and possibly with those individuals. That makes me wonder if that's the first chick that you've found that doesn't appear to have ingested plastics and is really healthy. Is it possible that the parent, being birds that live to 40 years old, are recognising what not to pick up when they're feeding? Or do you reckon it was chance?
Yeah. So basically this year we had 94% of our birds containing plastic. And we actually had a project that was running this season that specifically required birds that had no plastic. And it was so difficult to find those birds. They were so infrequent. That project didn't actually have any zero plastic birds. The closest we could get was birds with 1 or 2 or 3 pieces of plastic. And that's a whole other complicated, really interesting thing to talk about, is like how much plastic is too much, and is one piece something we should even be worried about. We can maybe loop back to that if we have time. But that's the point that we're at now, is that one of the sales points of Lord Howe Island used to be that we had exposed birds and we had unexposed birds. We had this beautiful natural experiment where we could pitch to fund agencies and to my boss and all these kinds of things, that this was this great opportunity to go and study impacted birds and not impacted birds. Well, now trying to find a not impacted bird is extremely difficult. And what we're finding is in years where, and this is just a hypothesis, we haven't tested it yet, but we do have the data to do it, so it's on our radar, it's in the priority queue, is it does at least appear to be that in years where we have, like in La Nina, where we have hotter water off the east coast of Australia, this is where the birds are foraging. That hotter water obviously causes the redistribution of the shearwaters' key prey. So squid and various things don't like those warming waters, so they either go deeper in the water column or they go somewhere else. Either way, that can make them quite unavailable to the birds. And there seems to be an early indication that in those years where we have hot waters, ocean warming events, we have birds with more and more plastic. Like this year, it was a La Nina, we had lots of hot water. And that suggests to us that actually when things get really desperate, when you can't find food, when it's in low abundance, you will eat anything to be able to find something to bring back to your chick, maybe to feel that sense of satiation or just to go through the motions of having found something and returning with food. So as the world warms, that does pose the question as to whether or not this situation is actually going to get even worse.
Brings me to another question, but I'll just pose it and we can perhaps kick it around after we go through the photos with Alix. But we supplementary feed all kinds of animals. Do you think we might be having to move to a situation where island nations and nations like Australia with large coastlines and lots of colonies of seabirds, I'm thinking Argentina, Chile, Peru, the whole northern hemisphere, we might need to actually be farming bait fish, for want of a better term, let's be generic about it, to actually maintain the health of the seabirds while we're looking at reducing plastics in the environment, because our warm waters are probably not going to chill down anytime in the near future. So I'll just leave that one out there and maybe we can come back to that later on. Alix, I'm going to go through all these pictures in the lab and some of the plastic bits. So can you talk us through the methodology? Because I noticed that some of the birds are dead and some of the birds aren't dead. Let's go with that. Let's start with, where's the one I had before? Getting plastics out of a, where are we? This one.
Yeah, I think the easiest place to start would probably be in the morning, and I could just run you through a day in the life of what we did while we were on our trip. And so we get up at the crack of dawn before the tourists and the dog walkers get down to the beach, and we scavenge the different beaches of Lord Howe Island to try and find chicks that have attempted to take flight in the night that weren't successful. And we call these beach-washed birds. I think you might have a picture of one sitting on the beach in a little rock pool. That might be a good example of what I'm talking about. But basically, these birds have attempted to leave the colony and take their first flight. But with their plastic load, they're really small, really fragile, and really weak. And they don't have the energy to take that flight and to begin their journey into becoming an adult. And this is something that I thought would be okay, but it actually hit me a lot harder. I've seen the photos, Jenn showed me videos, I understood what my role was when being on Lord Howe, but seeing these chicks and holding them, they're really fragile. It's really difficult for me to express, like the feeling of holding this really fragile, tiny bird. It just wasn't right. Like, adults are so tough. They're diving. Like, the adults, when they return into the colony at night, they come crashing through the canopy. One fully knocked my head torch off my face, and I was so gobsmacked, and it just waddled off like nothing had happened. Like, the adults are so tough, and these chicks, they're just so fragile and so precious, and it's just so awful seeing how sick they are, and they just sit there. Like, this one had obviously taken a flight and landed straight into the ocean and just been washed back in because it's so drenched that it's obviously gone through the ocean, and it was just really tough to imagine that. And we did actually have a couple that you would see them being washed up in real time. So they had obviously been fighting the surf throughout the night, and we would often go in just waist deep or whatever and collect them and stop that suffering. And the relief that you felt from the bird when you took its weight, it's just sad. They shouldn't have to feel that relief. They should be strong enough to fight and fly and just look after themselves. But in the morning, we would go and collect these beach-washed birds. Most of the time, they would just be grasping onto life, taking their last few breaths, or they would already have passed away from being beached. And then we would take them back to the lab and process them and go through their stomach. So we take some measurements before that. So we'll take their weight and their size and all different sort of body morphometrics. And then we'll cut them open and start looking inside their stomachs and counting the macroplastics that we can see. Yeah, that's a perfect example. And so there is a video where Megan and I, another PhD student, are actually taking the plastics out. Then we'll wash those plastics, weigh them and count them and sort them by colour and type if we can identify the type of plastic.
I'll run that video now and then we'll move on to another series of the lab pics.
Look at some of those sizes.
Can I grab some tweezers, Megan?
Yeah. Do I help take things?
Yeah, because I need to grab the other stuff. God, look at all the water in him still from last night. Oh, look at what was stuck in his throat. Oh my God. Okay, I should be able to work from here.
It's pretty horrifying, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I have really strong memories about this bird. It was towards the end of our trip and I was trying to find representative samples of extremely high loaded plastic birds. And it was really distressing because we had a few days left and I really wanted to make sure that we had representative samples for my study. And Jenn found this bird, and when you poke its tummy, you could feel it and you could hear it cracking. So we knew that there was lots of plastic in there, and we nicknamed it a cruncher because when you feel it, it crunches under your fingers and you can also audibly hear it. But the team were promoting it as a good sample and it just really wasn't sitting right with me. That I felt that this was a really good sample and I was getting really excited that I had the representative samples for my study, when in front of me was a really sick bird with really poor health, and that just hit me really hard. Where I didn't want to be excited and celebrating this. I wanted to be sad and feel what this bird was feeling, but it was a funny moment that kind of stuck with me a little bit, where, in science we're chasing the perfect experiment, but in wildlife that doesn't necessarily happen.
This is the bit that I hope people take away from our conversation. To think that think of your pet rabbit, your guinea pig, your kitten, and you pick it up to give it a cuddle and it crackles because it's full of crap. Think of the distress. If you've ever seen a pup that's eaten something it shouldn't have and it's trying to crap it out and it can't. Think of how distressed your pets have been when they've been ill. And this is millions. This is the life of millions and millions of seabirds happening right now, all because you're too lazy to put something in the bin, or because we're too tight as a community to properly process our waste. We really need to think about every choice we make when we buy something that's packaged in plastic, because your takeaway food container, once it's out in the sun, fragments, breaks into shards, into little pieces, washes down the stream, washes into the bay, and we just saw that video, and I'll probably run it again, but they're not all lucky like this guy. Tell us about this.
So overnight time, we will head back out into the colony and work with the chicks that haven't yet left or taken their first flight. And we will walk around the colony and feel their tummies, and those that we can feel plastic in, we'll bring back in lavage. We'll sit out in the colony and lavage, which is where we're flushing water through the bird and encouraging them to regurgitate the plastic contents within their stomach. One thing that I found really hard was that some were too weak to even lavage. And so that was really emotionally challenging when you're trying to help the bird and it still doesn't really have much of a chance. But those that we can help was really awesome. And then we could see them leave and do what they're meant to do, which was really nice. So it was nice knowing that we were sending them out with an empty stomach, so that first of all there's room for normal food and not plastic, like they've got more space in their stomach to consume what they're meant to consume, and that just gives them a bit more of a chance at life out in the sea. But we'll work for about 3 hours and do as many chicks as we can find and do this process.
But if they don't survive, this is what's next, isn't it?
Yeah. So this is the sad thing, is there's almost too much to even bulge out of the bird. What was really distressing when I opened this bird was that it was jam-packed up into its throat. And so there's just no room for anything else. And even if it was to attempt to regurgitate or get rid of that load, the plastic is so tightly packed in there that it doesn't stand a chance of regurgitating that. And so that bird was just stuck with that quantity of plastic.
What have we got here, Alix?
This is another chick that we've flushed, and you can see in the bin, that's where we catch the plastics. And you can see that there is quite a large amount that's come out of this chick. But what was significant about this piece was that it was quite abnormally shaped and quite large and very pointy, and it obviously would have been quite painful for that chick to A, ingest that, and then B, regurgitate it as well. But you can just see, compared to its face or its head size, that would have been quite a substantial piece of plastic for it to ingest. And I think the crazy thing about what we're seeing, and isn't often explained, is that the adults are going and foraging this plastic. They're swallowing it, they're bringing it back to their chick and regurgitating it. These chicks are then swallowing it, and then in this instance, we've regurgitated it. And so this plastic has gone in and out of wildlife 4 times, and that before we're getting it. And I just think that's really significant, that this piece of plastic has travelled in and out of various individuals and probably made quite a large impact to those individuals before we get our hands on it and we can dispose of it properly, or we keep the samples, but yeah, before it is removed. And I think that's really significant as well. These are examples of fudging that we've collected, and we're now sorting it to understand the various different types of plastic that we find. And you can see that they're quite large samples. That one that I'm sorting in particular is quite substantial for a lavage load, but we'll sort it in terms of colour to see if there's colour preference within the bird, and also if we can identify any different types of plastic that we can note as well. But most often you'll see in that picture there's lots of like fragments which are really hard to identify the source from.
And this was a really unique opportunity. So we were displaying them in this way, laying the plastics out really neatly and in that perfect rectangle on a white sheet of paper, because photographer Justin Gilligan was documenting this. I don't think any of these photos made it to the final cut of the Australian Geographic article that's out there this month, but it was still really fun and a little bit artistic. I think a welcome distraction for the team to sit and make something beautiful, I suppose, out of a really tragic situation. So the record holder for this species, that looks like a lot of plastic there on the screen, but I can tell you right away that's not even remotely close to a record holder. We recorded the record holder in 2011, and that was 276 pieces of plastic in one 90-day-old chick. And that 276 pieces weighed 64 grams, which is far and away a record holder to this day. We haven't even come close. And that 64 grams accounted for almost 15% of that bird's body mass. So for any of the listeners, if you just take your current mass, whatever you weigh, multiply it by 15%, it's probably somewhere between 8 and maybe 12 or 14 kilos. Imagine going about your day-to-day life, having to walk to the grocery store, cycle to work, really just about anything with, let's say, 10 kilos of plastic in your stomach. Never mind the fact that these young birds are only 90 days old. They are emaciated. Their growth has been stunted by a lack of proper nutrition and instead having been fed plastic. And now they are within hours of disembarking the island and undertaking the first and most significant migration from Lord Howe Island all the way to the Sea of Japan. How in the world are you going to do that with 276 pieces of plastic in your stomach and stunted wings and low body mass and all of the other things that we know are associated with exposure to plastic? It's just totally unthinkable.
This is for you, Alix.
Yeah, I have no idea what that is, but when I found it, I could not stop giggling. I was like, I don't even know how these birds swallowed it, how the chicks swallowed it, nothing. Like, I have pretty big hands. That piece of plastic is huge. The shape is bizarre. I haven't seen anything like it, and I just couldn't really fathom how it ended up in a baby bird.
Now, did that come out of as a result of arching a bird, or is that?
No, yeah, that was during the lab. So I cut open the bird and retrieved it from its stomach.
They're horrifying images, aren't they? And just wonder how you were able to do your work, because, look, it's a beautiful place, right? But there's this.
That was something I found hard. Like, people would see our photos of the beach and the sunrise, and we'd get back and people would ask us how our holiday was, or, you're so lucky to enjoy such beautiful sunrises. But I said to Jenn about halfway through the trip that it's really challenging to enjoy the beauty of the island when we're seeing so much pain and so much suffering, and we're working extremely long days, like we're working from 5:30 in the morning to 9:30 at night trying to help these birds. And I honestly felt really hopeless, and I couldn't do enough to help them. And it's really frustrating when people don't understand what we do and the weight of this problem. People are still denying or think that plastic is a distraction, and I find that really frustrating. And we have been talking about it within the lab, and eco-grief is a real problem, but we feel this pressure to show the worst of the worst. But the problem is so broad, and we're finding that even a small quantity of plastic affects the health of the bird. And so we really want people to try and understand that without having to see all these super heavy loaded birds. They shouldn't be like that. So it shouldn't take that for people to make a change when one or two pieces is affecting the health of these birds.
I think it's an important thing for us, for the world to think about and to talk about, because there's understandably a lot of pressure and expectation and hope and all of these wonderful words that we place on like the next generation of young and up and coming scientists there. We place all of our hope and well wishes on them. We believe that they're going to come up with all the innovative technology and things that's going to transform our world and make it a better place. And yet here's Alix's story, but Lill and Nina have similar ones. In Alix's case, halfway through the trip, she's thinking, maybe not in exactly these words, maybe they're my words, certainly they're my words, is I can't wait to go home because I just can't handle being here anymore. It just damages me. But the reality of the situation is you go home and then you come into your office and everything you read about, everything we talk about in meetings, every sample you touch, like literally everything we talk about as a lab, do, see, touch, read, everything is about climate change, sea level rise, ocean acidification, marine pollution, chemical pollution, habitat loss. This is a lot. This is a phenomenal burden to place on the next generation of young and up and coming scientists. And if you have them in the prime of their young careers, they should be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed going to Lord Howe Island, going like, holy smokes, this is the opportunity of a lifetime. And halfway through that trip, they're going, how do I get out of here? This is breaking me on the inside. I'm changed forever. We need to rethink what we're doing, and we need to have this conversation, because these scientists, we're not setting them up to transform our world into a better place. We're setting them up to be broken.
That's a really important point, Jenn, and something that in the last little while has been concerning me is it seems like in the space that we're operating in, that we've got hashtag climate emergency, sucking up all the air in the room. And we've got hashtag biodiversity emergency that is equally as important, but has different mitigating factors and different actions that need to happen. And at the same time, we've got hashtag plastic pollution, hashtag seabirds, hashtag wetlands, whatever you want to say. But they seem to me to be all equally important, and that we're not going to have a healthy, functioning biosphere and countless ecosystems and healthy habitats around the globe if we're only looking at one. So we can see the problem, but as a team, how do you see the best way for us to move forward and to be able to recover some sense of positivity and achievement rather than staring down this endless tunnel of despair?
I think I can maybe add 2 cents, but then I'd really like to hand over to the girls is we make a concerted effort in the lab to do things differently and what we say better, which is we don't try and pretend like these things aren't happening. So exactly as you say, there's a lot of environmental crises that are happening right now, and they're all happening at the same time. So their impacts are cumulative. Many of these effects are synergistic, meaning like they're just together, they're making things more complex and more rapid. And so to be really siloed and to only think of one at a time is so naive and short-sighted and a really ineffective way of tackling the world's crises. And so one of the things we do is we write papers, bold, editorial kind of perspective piece papers that tackle these exact issues and these controversial opinions head on. Plastics is a distraction from other more important issues like climate change. Like we literally just wrote a paper on that this month and said, no, bogus. That's not the case at all. Let's argue about this. Let's have that conversation. And we have other conversations in the lab. So just this week, we've had a conversation about what Alix was saying, what is a good sample and what it's like to constantly be under the barrage of bad news, everything you read, see, touch, do. And what do we do in-house in the lab and what do we do more broadly to have these conversations to make life a little bit more bearable? We write papers, we talk about it, but I'm sure the girls have other thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think if we're asking what can we do that's actually going to start to make some tangible change, the way that I think about it is we've got this issue, a range of issues, basically, for example, everything climate, plastic or pollution related. We've got government and industry and all the sort of big players up here that need to work towards that goal. And then we've got, say, the consumer communities and individuals down here that are also working to that same goal. For me, at least from the space that I sit in, my social groups and where I live, it feels like, for the most part, people are relatively aware of issues. They're quite switched on and for the most part know what they need to do. But at least for me, and especially as a young person, and probably particularly from coming from a science space, it is extremely disappointing seeing the lack of action that is happening on a government level, from that higher up level. And if I'm being completely candid and honest, our job is to turn up and, like Jenn said, is to read and write everything that is pretty much the most depressing thing that you can come across in this day and age. We do that every single day. For a PhD, that's about 4 years. For Jenn, it's been a lot longer than that. For Nina, it's going to be the best part of a year. And to see people like those in positions of decision-making and power and government, for example, to either completely disregard or ignore what has been presented to them as this is the problem, this is what is happening, and these are the steps and recommendations to overcome that, and to ignore all of that, it's gut-wrenching, and I don't actually really know how to put that in any other way other than being just completely honest. We need a lot more action from government. We need big changes. We need it yesterday, and it needs to happen a lot faster than it is. I think I'm hopeful that, particularly in Australia, we've come into a new government. I am genuinely hopeful that something will change. But even then, hope is nice to have, but realistically, we need to be doing a lot more. I, for a recent project, looked at waste management in Australia, particularly in remote regions, to understand where are we at, what are the challenges that are existing there. And I was hoping to look at plastics as a problematic waste, but it became apparent that we need to even step back from that and just look at all waste as one item. And the challenges there is that people working in that space feel like they're not even being heard when they report from a local government area to, say, state or federal. They often feel like those that are working in that space to better it, to understand what's happening, their voices aren't being heard. A lot of the time, people can't even access basic recycling. A lot of the time, education around what plastics are and aren't recycled, that's not even in question because people are still not aware of and don't have the resources to understand even items such as dirty nappies can't go in a recycling bin. It's things like that. And so there are a lot of very easy, I guess, low-hanging fruit that in Australia, at least I'm aware of, that we can pick and we can address and we can start to get some really good action going. But I think I really struggle with eco-grief and a lot of the ways that scientists perhaps are treated. And yeah, I don't really know how to put that into a more articulated way. There's a lot of frustration, but we just need to be heard, essentially, is the crux of it.
Lill, you've brought up a couple of things which have problems. I'm moving to I'm 56, sorry. I was studying this and talking about this in an environmental science subject classroom in 1982, right? It's not new. And in that time, We've done nothing. The fact that I think it's still 7 years away before we're going to get the different recycling bins here where I live. It's different all over the country and all over the world. I did sorry to bring it all back to me, but this is how long the problem's been around. After I studied horticulture, I went and did my 3-month placement in Townsville. And one of the tasks we had to do every morning was walk along the beach and the botanic gardens or the garden at the Strand, the waterfront. And we had to pick through the rocks, the breakwater, and pull out all the bloody disposable nappies that people had been stuffing. Oh, I don't want to throw them. I can't throw them in the bin. They stink. So they go down to the waterfront and stuff them into between the rocks. And then the Parks and Gardens crew in the morning, and because it's really hot, we start really early, so 6 a.m. in the morning, grabbing all the stinky, dirty nappies so that normal people don't have to see them and smell them. Why are we selling this stuff? We've got cloth nappies and we've got washing machines. It just staggers me that the government don't have the guts to say, piss off, buy some sard and wash them, soak them and wash them and hang them out. It's the most gutless display. We've been captured totally, completely captured. The governments have done nothing. Our plastic doesn't get recycled, as you just said, Lill. I've been trying to do a story about it. You can't talk to anyone and find anything out. The councils don't want to talk about it because they're not doing their job. The state governments don't want to talk about it because they're not doing their job. The waste disposal companies, most of them are pirate bloody outfits. Most of the stuff is being put into bales or pallets and sitting in warehouses waiting to catch fire. It's a broken system, and we're captured by a couple of companies that keep producing and don't take any responsibility for what they do. I'm off my soapbox now, but this report that's being released today is a real turning point, and we'll find out what colour and how brave our leaders really are, because we've identified all the problems and we can't not act. And if we don't act, it's an absolute travesty. And those individuals are to blame now because they have the power to act. Alix, your turn. I'm shutting up now. How do you deal with the feelings, and what do you think we need to do next?
Well, I'll start with what I think we need to do next, and I'll bring it back to science. In the fact that funding is very limited, and particularly in ecology, there's not much funding to do research that we want to do. And I think in order to really maximise science and what we can research and investigate and understand about what's happening with pollution, disciplines need to work together, including climate change researchers, pollution researchers. We don't have to be separate. We can work with physicists, we can work with medical science, we can all come together and maximise what we're collecting and the information that we're collecting from those samples. And I feel like it's really apparent in science that scientists like to hold their cards really close to their chest. They don't like to share their data. They wait until the paper is ready to publish, and that can take years and years. And I would really like to see more collaboration, more maximisation of sample and the priorities that we are addressing. And I don't think that's currently really happening across the globe. And what keeps me hopeful? That's a tough question. I think my motivation every day is that the birds just deserve better. They deserve a happy life. They deserve to be healthy. And that is my biggest motivation at the moment. And so everything I'm doing is for wildlife, and that's what I'm passionate about. I got into conservation because wildlife isn't having the life that it deserves, and we're ruining it on so many different levels. And my motivation is just to right that wrong.
Alix, I'm really impressed by all of you guys, which I'm really glad that I was able to talk to you. And that's a generic term. Guys, don't jump on me. I'm old, and the habits of a lifetime are very hard to break, even when you think about them. Is communication and collaboration going to be able to make a difference Alix, and throw this open to everyone too before we get back to you, Nina. Thanks very much for that, Alix. I've been doing this for a couple of years now, and I find all the scientists that I reach out to really happy to share and collaborate. But where I get frustrated and why my temperature goes up and I get off on rants all the time is I don't think anyone needs to know the broad brush solutions. Sure, we need to know a lot more to make the solutions better and more targeted and things like that. But I get frustrated because nothing appears to be happening. And that when companies do something, they do greenwashing. They say 0.002 cents from every sale of our shampoo, whatever, goes to something. There's this Botanica thing at the moment that's on TV about saving our wildflowers. Stop bloody cutting this shit down, right? And stop producing this stupid packaging that looks pretty but is causing extreme damage out in the environment. Keep your bloody 0.02 cent sale. That's where I get grumpy because, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm just from watching it for so long, we're giving money to the Koala Foundation, we're giving money to this, we're giving money to that. Well, koala's about to go bloody extinct. Keep your bloody greenwashing corporate bullshit and do something to make a difference, not to manage your brand through PR crap.
One of the biggest challenges is that people are getting so much of this information that it's almost overwhelming. They're seeing problems in climate change and pollution, and they're almost becoming numb to these photos, and people often don't want to address the problems because it makes them feel uncomfortable. And often the solution has many different challenges, like people becoming vegetarian and vegan and all this sort of stuff, plastic-free versus using animal products that are biodegradable. All of these things come with ethical problems, and people find it difficult to find where they sit. And so they often ignore it and don't come to a conclusion. And then they see this greenwashing advertising or whatever, and they see that's the solution, and it's right in front of them and it's easy, but it's often not actually addressing the root concern. And I feel like we're overloading all this information onto the public, and they're just becoming numb and blocking it out.
I'd be interested in each of your thoughts about this because we're confronted with it every day. I saw some figures the other day that for all of the carbon pollution out there every year, 2% is by private jets, right? So that's maybe a couple of thousand, maybe at the most, maybe 20,000 individuals are doing that. Passenger economy worldwide is 7%. So my concern is that I've gone pretty much animal free, and not for any reason other than it's just been easier. But in my flat, my place, we've reduced our waste by about 75% when we look at our fortnightly collections and things like that. I don't buy anything in plastic if I can, and if I have to buy soft plastics, I take it to the supermarket to be recycled and all that. But guess what? I can't shift the needle. Coca-Cola Amatil can shift the needle, and we've all been hoodwinked. The greenwashing is so total. This is my view. I really want to know what you think about this. The five of us can take extreme measures, but we can't shift the needle. But 150 people in the boardrooms of Australia and probably 5,000 people in the boardrooms worldwide can make a difference. They could make a 10-year plan to end this shit. That's what I say. What do you think about where we find ourselves with the...
Goes back to the individual person in that I guess plastics has taught us to live a very convenient lifestyle, and it's been around for so long now that we are having to untrain those habits and live a little bit less conveniently. But it's hard to do with the way that the system is set up, in that you have to work so much and you study and you have family and you have all these commitments in your life that making your own milk or washing that cloth diaper just seems impossible because we don't have the time to do that. I think on an individual perspective is that a zero waste lifestyle needs to be made more appealing, but also more achievable. And we don't really see that anywhere unless you're already into that kind of thing. But the everyday person probably wouldn't know how to cut out plastics by making it themselves. Like making your own wraps can literally be so easy to do, but we don't naturally think to do that because we've learnt to just go to the supermarket and buy wraps there. But I think that can make the most difference is by living a little bit less convenience, and embrace making things yourself and doing things, that way.
If you've got time to watch Temptation Island or Neighbours or Home and Away or anything else, right? This is where I'm a grumpy old man. If you've got time to watch the latest series of whatever, you got time to wash your nappies. We let everybody off with people aren't idiots, right? People are lazy. You can buy glass, you don't have to buy plastic.
Yes. Yeah.
It's not difficult to do. I haven't made any sacrifices in my day-to-day life to do it. I'm not plastic free, but by jingos, there's a whole lot. And not only plastic, paper as well, cardboard. If you just reduce, supermarkets have made a big difference by getting rid of the single-use plastic bags for that type of issue. But
those things definitely need to be more readily available. Like in my own lifestyle, I try to live with not creating so much waste, but that involves me going to 4 different shops to do that because it's not all within the one facility. I have to go to the Whole Foods shop to get all of those items without plastic wrapping, and then I have to go to the fruit and veg market to not get my vegetables wrapped in plastic. So from a bigger perspective, it would be great if all of these things could be put together in an easy place to make embracing a zero waste lifestyle a little bit more achievable and make it a bit more convenient in that way as well.
The reason I get grumpy again about that point you made there, Nina, is perfect. I live in an area where we don't have a shop where I can go and buy my lentils or my beans in my own container and take them away. So I'm forced to buy them in plastic. I can't buy them in paper. And that's my point about the boardrooms and everything. People, they can make the decision to make those options available and get them ranged into supermarkets.
Yes.
And the fact that they don't means that they're to blame, not you and me, not you and me. We can't buy toothpaste without getting a really nasty kind of plastic waste and those tops.
And what I find interesting with that as well is that it is more expensive to also live that way, because me buying that plastic-free tooth powder in a jar is $20 opposed to $3 for something that I could have bought in plastic packaging. So it's like when you try to scale it back to more of a simple lifestyle, that's when you start adding on the more of a price. And I think that reflects in the way that maybe it's not so popular, but also because it is more of a trend to, at the moment, to go plastic free in some terms, that all of these smaller, or I guess other businesses, put a higher market price on those items. So you're effectively having to spend more money to live a little bit more simple, which is quite unfair.
The other thing is we're all quite privileged because we live in Australia, so we have access to a whole lot of products, but a whole lot of the world doesn't have choice that we do in what consumer products are offered to us. And that's again why I point up again to the regulators and to the boardrooms about the kinds of products that they make available to. There's 200 countries in the world, right? And probably only 30 of them, maybe 50 of them, have got the kind of choices when we walk along our main streets. So that needs to be out there in the air as well, because we often only approach the problem and or the challenge and the solutions from where we're rooted, from where our own feet are planted. And again, that's why I point at the boardrooms and the distributors and all the business owners who need to make those kind of ranging decisions if we want to make a difference. I want to move off the gloom and doom a little bit because I get tempted to. Some of the other research you were doing, because we're talking about seabirds, does that come up? I'm not seeing it. Here we are. Okay. Collecting data is really important. So let's talk about this part of the research and end on a happy note.
This is the project I very briefly mentioned earlier. We were attempting to deploy these kind of waist-bang tracking devices on the shearwaters on Lord Howe Island. So I guess what's special about these particular devices is they are extremely small. You can see roughly around the size of your thumbnail. They weigh only about 5 grams, which is incredibly lightweight. On the top surface there is a solar panel, and the inside of the tag is mostly battery. And the long antenna that's disappearing off the side of the screen is an Argo satellite antenna. So these tags, unlike a lot of wildlife tags where you have to deploy the tag on the animal, so you have to catch that animal once, and then you actually have to catch that animal again a second time to retrieve the data, because most tags are what we call archival, meaning they archive or they store the data. These tags are quite different. The solar panel and that long Argos antenna mean that the battery life of these tags is somewhere in the range of 6 to 12 months. And the Argos antenna allows the data to be transmitted in real time, meaning every single day, to the Argos satellites circling our atmosphere, and then back down to my phone. So I just had my phone with me on Lord Howe Island, and each day I was able to log into an app and see exactly where the birds had gone, which was quite cool.
Does that mean, Jenn, that you will be able to make those fantastic graphical animations of where the birds go, like we see with the godwits and whatnot that attract? Eventually, will that be the kind of information you'll be able to present to the public?
Yeah, that's right. So we were deploying these on the juvenile birds, the chicks. So the birds were carrying these tags at only 90 days old. And broadly, we know where these birds go. We know that they leave Lord Howe Island and eventually end up in the Sea of Japan. But we didn't actually know what route they take or how long that journey takes. So that was a big part of the puzzle, was how fast do they fly and those kinds of things, particularly for these young birds, because these young birds, once they leave Lord Howe Island, are not actually going to return to Lord Howe Island for 5 years. And the really amazing thing is, in those intervening 5 years, these birds do not touch land. So they live up to their name of seabird. They are truly sea or ocean going birds for that entire time. So no, they do not touch land at all in that intervening 5 years. So if you deployed a traditional type of tag where it was archival and you needed to catch that bird a second time and get the tag back to get the data, you would be waiting a very long time, and your odds of catching that bird again a second time would probably be quite low, not just because of the passage of time, 5 years, but also because of, I suppose, the main point of this project was to look at the impact of plastic on the route that the birds take when they migrate north, the speed that they fly, but also their survival rates. And what we suspect, and we have a bit of evidence for, not enough evidence, but a bit, is that the survival rates are exceptionally low. So the odds of seeing that bird again a second time and getting that tag back would be essentially zero. And so again, these tags that communicate with satellites in real time and generate and send the data directly to my phone were exactly the type of technology that we needed to be able to answer this particular question.
That's devastating. I was hoping we were going to get some good news out of that focus there, Jenn. But we really need to understand it and not only make some... We don't only need to have the information out there, we need to have the right actions being taken. Let's wrap it up. Let's look for some joy. Nina, what are you going to be focusing on in the next 6 months?
So much joy.
After that is going to be stressful because my thesis will be needed to be completed within that time. And I don't really know what I will take a break after that.
Amazing experiments.
Yeah. I've got some really cool experiments coming up within my project. And I am very excited to see what we find and to see if it does help with the broader plastic research and beyond that, with how they can enhance their methodology so that we can have more assurance that the results that we're seeing are going to reflect what is actually going on out in the real world. So yeah, I'm excited about the possibilities of my project. And yeah, although it's going to be challenging, I'm super excited about doing that and seeing the end result.
Well, Nina, keep me informed and I'll feed out as much as I can through the bird emergency channels. Alix, good news. Come on, give us some joy for the next.
Equally, we're all really doing exciting lab work and we're really keen to start honing in on the problems that we're seeing and the birds that we find. And so I think we all have such big motivation to deliver these messages as fast as we can and discover what the problems are, but also just working together as a team. Like, I think we have such a beautiful team and such an encouraging environment. So I think having this space is really awesome to deliver what we're doing, and working together with such powerful individuals and women is just really cool.
Oh, your turn.
Well, I think we're all at a similar stage, even though we're doing vastly different projects, but we're all coming up to a stage where we're about to either do lab work or analyze data, or we're starting to get those answers for these questions that we've been holding on to for a little while now, while we've been doing sort of setting the scene, doing the background reading, that sort of thing. And so now we're, I guess, actually doing the cool science. I'm really excited for Nina because it's very likely that her research will inform at least mine and likely everyone else's, because we all have an element of lab work. And so it will be really cool to be reflecting on, I guess, her research that looks at what is best practice, how can we do science even better, particularly in the plastic space. So I'm really keen to be in the lab, and maybe it's a little bit cheesy, but I genuinely am just so happy to be part of a lab that is so supportive, it is so accepting, it is so inspiring. I think we've covered it pretty well. What we do can be pretty rough at times and very multifaceted, and those feelings can be quite multi-layered and a bit hard to dissect at times. But I genuinely just want to say I feel like I found a place where I belong, where I can do the things that I dreamed about doing as a child around people that are all like-minded and just so beautiful and fantastic in so many ways. So I hope that's a nice way to polish that one off.
For sure, for sure. Now, for the people watching, if you want to make a comment or ask a question, this is going to be your opportunity while we wind up. Jenn, for you, what's the, obviously continuing the Lord Howe project just keeps going on, but what other things are you going to broaden the scope or perhaps narrow the scope with the Adrift Lab over the next couple of years?
Gosh, we always have so many different projects on the go. The uniting theme is usually some combination of plastics, chemicals, or wildlife. If you're really lucky, it's all three at once. So it will continue in that vein. I think one of the things that I'm really excited about is increasing levels of engagement with Indigenous communities around Australia and internationally as well, including with Steph Burrell. So starting to do a much better job of raising the profile, giving more platform to, and integrating Western and traditional knowledge in the way that we always should have been, but probably haven't been especially good at. So that's really exciting because we work with other disciplines. We push for and are encouraged to do interdisciplinary science, to work with supervisors like Alix's, who is a medical scientist, to work with physics, engineers, all of these kinds of things. Lill's going to be working with our engineering department to look at a materials science perspective. But until recently, there hasn't really been a strong voice and a push to integrate Australia's original scientists. And that sits really heavy, I think, with each and every one of us here. And we can't make up for lost time, but what we can do is open that conversation fully and embrace it wholeheartedly and run with it. And that gives me, as soon as I talk about it, I feel an incredible amount of hope.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Jenn. It can be difficult to do that outreach. Certainly, I know I'm always looking to include Indigenous scientists doing Indigenous work, but it's very difficult to find the people to talk to promote it and to push it out into the wider community. But I think we all have to understand or bear in mind, probably a better way to frame it, that we have to bear in mind that a whole lot of ways to solve the problems that we've created are probably already known. We're not aware of it, and we're certainly not pushing it out wider. Now, Everybody here has their own Twitter handle. They'll all be in the show notes and links and whatnot if they're happy to share them. Jen, what's the best socials for people to follow the goings on with the lab?
So we're on all of them except TikTok. We've embraced that one, yeah. We haven't done the cringy TikTok dances yet.
I'm quite fine not doing them.
I think our videos are a little too sad for that. But yes, we're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under Adrift Lab or Adrift Lab Science, depending on which one is which. We all have our own Instagram and Facebook handles and things like that, and you can find us through that. Yeah. We also have an Adrift Lab webpage, which is adriftlab.org, and we try to be pretty active on that with lots of news articles and things that kind of summarize who's been doing what and where and celebrating conference awards and grant funding and all of those kinds of wonderful things.
Now, to make it easy for everyone so that you don't have to go looking all over the place to find them, when I publish this, the page and the episode, thebirdemergency.com/adrift. That'll be pretty easy, and I'll put everything in the one spot so that you can then go back out and easily find all of the Adrift Lab stuff. I just wanted to make a comment, and I hope it's not taken the wrong way, but in the last little while, the big push in the hashtag SciComm and pushing with the International Women's Day and whatnot, women in STEM, has just been fantastic. And there's 4 examples sitting in front of me, but we've talked about Steph Burrell, Claire Greenwell as well. I've interviewed, and Kat Young, and the amount of amazing work being done by women in this conservation ecology space is phenomenal. And to me, the natural leaders, when I look for comment and I look for people to be involved and embrace the kind of outreach, which is really what I do, it's always women jumping in first. Boys, do that, you're going to be left way, way behind, and there won't be any boys doing TED Talks, I reckon. So congratulations. Thanks so much for being part of the Bird Emergency. I really appreciate the time you've taken. Jen, I mentioned to you when we were setting this up, the visuals and the way you've been communicating the Lord Howe project, I think has been exactly what's been needed. Echo grief is an issue, but I think the shock tactics are a chance to maybe shake some action, as a fantastic group in the 60s once said, Flaming Groovies, big shout out there. And I hope that organisations like PETA and other groups that are concerned about animal liberation and are looking at agriculture start to cast it a bit wider, because the suffering and the pain and obviously the emotional distress that these birds are feeling is no less valid and no less important than any of the other animals that are being fought for daily. So my 2 cents, thebirdemergency.com. If you go to birdemergency.com/coffee, you can help me pay for my internet, right? So that I can talk to more amazing scientists. Alix, Lill, and Dr. Jenn Lavers, Adrift Lab, part of the University of Tasmania. Thanks so much for being part of the Bird Emergency.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. This has been awesome.
Yeah, really great.
Well, I really hope we can do it again. And Jen, particularly, so many of the projects that you're doing, things that I would really like to talk about. And I want to get Seabird Saturday up as a regular thing. If I get Seabird Saturday up as a regular thing, that means I need seabird scientists to talk to me so that I can distribute stuff on a Saturday. You're all welcome anytime back again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Graham.
Yes.
Thank you.
Seabird nerds. They're the best. Are they the best kind of bird nerds? Fantastic. I'm feeling like I should be in one of those medieval drama comedies with my stupid beanie, but by geez, it's cold.
It is.
I'm Grant Williams. I'm a bird nerd. This has been the Bird Emergency. Thanks to the Adrift Lab crew. We'll see you next time.
Awesome. Thank you.